a year and a half. So I got so used to people calling me Avi that now I just tell even Israelis and Jewish people to call me Avi. It's just easier.
Can you speak Mandarin or anything? No.
I mean, I can say, "Give me one milk." I know how to, or I could say like really basic stuff. But unfortunately, COVID came about before I could really get a hang of anything.
I love learning languages.
Guys, we're live. There seems to be a lag, so we didn't know we're live. So our friends got to see our little small talk, which is a sign that we're all friends. But
it wasn't a fake. When we're nice to each other, it's not contrived. It's
exactly. No.
Non-GMO organic.
We're still gonna do the official intro. And we're live. Hello, friends from around the world. Welcome to the Great Debate, where we have vibrant discussions on the most important issues of our time, but we do so in a way that's respectful and productive. Not a debate where both sides try to defeat one another, rather where both sides work together to find common ground. That's what makes this debate great. Tonight, or today, or this morning, wherever in the world you are, we will be debating Trump versus Biden. The United States is more divided than it's been probably since the Civil War. We have massive protests across the country. There is rioting and looting. There are record-breaking wildfires, which seem to be connected to climate change. And we have over 200,000 deaths that are related to COVID. Friendships are being ruined. People are losing jobs over their political opinions. Can we make it back from the brink? Well, today we're gonna have a rare spectacle. It's going to be a conversation on one of the most polarizing topics of our time, but in a way that's respectful. And I say this is a rare spectacle because we do not see this kind of discourse. But our hope with the Great Debate is that this discourse becomes unrare and it becomes common. That's what we're trying to achieve, not only on this channel, but in conversations all across the world. The point of the Great Debate is to bring people together and be able to work out their differences in a respectful manner. That's what we're here to do. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce my two guests. To my bottom left, Avichai Korn, who is a government graduate from the London School of Economics and Political Science. He's passionate about international relations, ethnic conflicts, human rights, and East Asian politics and society. Welcome, Avi.
Thank you so much.
And to my bottom right, Garrett Lomauro, a third-generation American who advocates for liberty, a strong private sector, and civil discourse. Can you tell from the intros who supports who? Perhaps. We're going to get started just by giving each guest a little opportunity to share their political philosophy, where they're coming from. This way, this will give us a better insight as to, just where they're coming from when we approach this sensitive topic. Avi, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm here in Eilat, and the sun has just set here, which I hope is a good metaphor for the Trump presidency. Sorry, I hope I could kick it off with a joke. At any rate, and I wanted to say, as you were going through Garrett's views, that civil liberty and strong civil society and a strong market economy are all values that I share with Garrett, and I hope that can serve as a way of bridging some differences. I think that differences in opinion are what makes politics interesting and fun, and unfortunately now in America extremely divisive. I don't expect to agree with everything or with most things about Garrett, but I've been talking to him for upwards of a week now in the preliminary discussions leading up to this debate, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what he thinks, to challenging him on views where we don't agree, and on trying to enhance people's understandings of very important issues in what Adar has correctly characterized as very, very troubling times. I wanted also, before I begin, to really humbly thank Adar for organizing and hosting this. I've known you for years, and I can say that in addition to being a very warm and fair-minded person, you're committed through activism to fostering a spirit of open, direct, and civil engagement with different groups in Israel and everywhere else. Your work has been a testament to the fact that you don't need to be an expert or an elite to have informed, respectful discussions about the issues that matter most. And I think most importantly, that decency, respect, and the ability to approach controversial matters open-mindedly is of crucial importance in today's contentious political landscape. And I'd also like to extend that thanks to Garrett, who, as I said, has been extremely friendly, warm, and considerate in the lead up to this debate. And I'm really looking forward to discussing where we disagree and where we might be able to find common ground, or at least to inform people better as they head into the polls on November 3rd or mail in their ballots remotely.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you. Before we give it over to Garrett, I just want to mention that there's like a technical glitch that you guys, the guest speakers, will not be able to see people's comments, but there are people writing things. I will relay the questions to you. For some reason, that feed is not connected to our backend software, just so you know. But whoever's joining us, let us know where in the world you're joining us from. We normally have an international crowd, and I'd love to hear where you're joining in from. And feel free to engage in vibrant discussion and ask questions. Towards the end, we will get to viewer questions. So, Garrett, all you.
Yeah, thanks, Adar. And again, I want to thank you for having us on to do this debate. I think it's extremely important for people to try to understand these topics from a very civilized, informative point of view. Right, as Avi said, obviously I'm going to be supporting a Trump administration. He'll be supporting a Biden administration. So right there, we're not going to be seeing eye to eye. However, we can still see each other, you know, in a way where we actually can understand where we're coming from. And instead of attacking each other on a personal level or on some sort of tribal level, my team versus your team, we're just going to talk about the ideas themselves. So, yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on, and I've really been appreciative of our conversations that we've had in the lead up to this moment. And yeah, I look forward to getting
Great to have you both here. That's what makes this debate great. And viewers, if you like this, smash that like button. If you don't, give it a down vote. We support that too. We just want you to express yourself. Garrett, do you want to explain a little bit about your political philosophy?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I'd say for the majority of my adulthood, going back to when I was the age of 18, I've always kind of had, like, we'll say, some sort of like political interest or some sort of just, I don't know, just overall consciousness of it. It's been a weird, not weird, but it's been like a fun journey. Back in 2008, first time I ever got to vote at the age of 18 was actually voted for Barack Obama. 2012, 2016, I voted for Gary Johnson. Philosophically, I would say I've always been attracted to candidates that wanted to be either about great change or people that maybe wanted to buck the system a little bit, because based on what I've been able to see, especially in post-World War II America, it seems like status quo has kind of gotten lazy with a lot of the topics, and I think that's why a guy like Trump was actually able to get elected, was because perhaps the tone deafness and the deafness that a lot of these establishment Washington DC candidates have. They're just not aware that, like, yeah, there's actually issues that like affect the everyday person, whether it's in urban settings, rural settings, etc. I would say for myself, philosophically, I would say I'm more socially conservative with some libertarian kind of like leanings, and you'll see that in this debate how that kind of framework kind of, I guess, guides me on how I view the topics that we're going to get into today. So yeah, that's where I'd say I'm coming from philosophically.
Great. So let's get started. I guess let's start with COVID-19. Over 200,000 COVID-related deaths in the United States, leading the world both in cases and deaths. We'll start that. We'll give it over to Avi. Avi, how do you think Trump has dealt with COVID-19?
I think that I want to start, before I talk about what I think Trump has done wrong, I want to talk about what a good response to COVID-19 looks like in order to give us a metric for the response that we've seen, for judging the response that we've seen. So I think that a good response to the COVID pandemic would have consisted of two fundamental characteristics, neither of which, unfortunately, I feel we've seen with Trump. The first is communicating a clear, consistent message which recognized the scope of the problem from the beginning, or as close to the beginning as possible until now. I have not seen that, and I can get into extensive details on how I've not seen that. And the second would have been to do everything in his power to implement an effective policy to quell the number of deaths, which has certainly not happened. I don't think that when you talk about the number of deaths and the number of cases, I think that tells us something, but I don't think it tells us nearly as much as the death per million, in which America is now 9th in the world in terms of severity. There are, what I really want to do in this discussion, rather than simply say things are bad in America, I think that we can tie the degree of severity in America to specific things that Trump has done, which have led to this magnitude of death. So in short, my argument, or well, there's no better word for it. My argument in this debate is two things. Number one, that on a communication level, on a level of leading the country, Trump has failed dramatically, and I'll get into exactly why and how. I mean, there are now recordings of him admitting that he knows the severity of the crisis, and then spending 2 months downplaying it and even deceiving the public about it for, I would argue, no reason, and I'll get into that once I've let Garrett have his say, because I'm really interested to hear what he has to say. And the second thing was the fact that a lockdown wasn't implemented on a national level, which I think absolutely needed to happen, and I'll explain why that needed to happen and how it could have happened. I'm also cognizant, I want to limit my arguments here and be reasonable, because I'm not somebody who will point a finger at Trump and say he did every single thing wrong. Trump was underinformed about the virus by China, which actively concealed it. He was given inconsistent information by the WHO, and I'll get into the effects of that. And Trump also dealt with a challenge that he couldn't have unilaterally implemented a lockdown on the country, because the president of the United States, by most credible accounts, does not have the constitutional authority to do that. So I'm not blaming Trump for a failure to do things that he didn't have control of. What I do want to say is that the WHO gave the same information to the entire world, and China gave the same information to the entire world. So these two things cannot independently or sufficiently account for why we are where we are. The second thing I want to say is that I didn't see Trump as a leader of the country make an appeal to state and local governments to do the shutdown, or to the American people in February or March to support a shutdown, which, by the way, the majority of Americans at the time supported and have supported for long periods throughout the lockdown. And there have been long periods in which Trump did everything, in my opinion, from saying the lockdown would go down by itself. He said that there were only 15 cases, it would disappear, to advancing use of drugs that were either not helpful or even harmful as a treatment for COVID, to saying, oh, we don't want the cure to be worse than the disease. I'm at a loss to understand how we could have a cure that's worse than 200,000 people and counting dying, not to mention the national economy decimated. So in sum, I wanted to say that Trump has failed in both of the parameters I set out. The first parameter being communication, the second parameter being policy. And my ultimate argument throughout this first part of our debate is that just like a CEO, which leads a company to ruin, in a preventable scenario, or just like an NFL coach that goes 2-14, or just like a general which loses a decisive battle in a war, Trump needs to be replaced for the good of the people to whom he's accountable. That's my take here.
Thank you, Avi. Garrett, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I'm going to be coming at it from the perspective, kind of what Avi touched upon about things that I think get maybe mischaracterized, admitting obviously some of the charges he levied against a Trump administration, and also looking at the differences, because again, this debate is about Trump versus Biden, not what I think should have happened or what Avi thinks should happen, but if Biden had been responsible, right, of something like of this magnitude, COVID-19, what would that look like? So we could just kind of open it up for general discussion. Avi, what's something that you really want to, I guess, bring up that you think is a point of contention against the Trump administration that we can kind of just hammer out?
I think at this point,
you brought up a lot, so I just want to like kind of go through.
Yeah, I know I went on a lot. I think at this point, let's start with on, I believe it was February 7th, he gets up in this interview and says, I know COVID is worse than the flu, worse than, quote, strenuous strains of the flu. I'm not sure if that's an exact quote, but he said it's worse than the flu. We knew it was more deadly than the flu and more contagious. And then he spent literally days after that, gets up in front of the American people and says, it's the flu. You know how many people die of the flu every year? Not only that, he gets up and says he wants the country open by Easter, when his health experts are predicting between 100 and 200,000 deaths. We've now had more than that. Now, I mean, he got up in front of the American people for the better part of 2 months before admitting that this thing was serious and misled them about the severity and the implications of the virus, told us that it would go away by a miracle, told us that the numbers would go down to zero. If from the point of view, you're not part of the Trump administration, but if from the point of view of a Trump supporter, you can explain to me how that wasn't extremely harmful at a time when COVID was spreading its invisible fingers through the United States, I would be extremely appreciative and enlightened to hear how that did anything other than compromise America's ability to handle this virus, to be honest.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I can't obviously argue against some of the missteps that he made in terms of public communication.
Garrett, do you agree with Avi that he failed at how he communicated the severity of the virus?
Absolutely, because there's the reality of, look, I have so much data, and I'm sure Avi did it as well. That's why he touched on it at the beginning. When it came to making decisions and actions, yeah, he's doing a lot. But when it comes to how he's communicating it to the public, you can kind of tell it's where, and that's the one fatal flaw that he always has, is that he kind of gets his ego in the way of just being able to kind of just be like, all right, well, like, here's what we're going to do. I think the problem with him is that he's always, and he's admitted in interviews, he's always trying to think positive. He's always trying to, like, things are just going to work out. Always trying to, like, think positive. And, like, while I admire that, there's
when you're on that, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, let Garrett finish, and then Avi.
Sorry. Yeah.
I was just kind of saying that, again, since we're talking Trump versus Biden, right? Or how, again, it's like, I'm going to look at this through a realism lens, and I could easily turn the tables and go, okay, but if the Biden administration was in control, or if Democrats were in control, like, they didn't do, it's not like they did this great job at being able to communicate about it. Or here, back in February, Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, this is late February, by the way. This guy was the, he was the most prominent member of Vice President Joe Biden's Public Health Advisory Committee. And he said, quote, most people are thinking that there may be a bit of an overreaction by many, maybe even our own country. That was him being interviewed by Penn Today as he came back from his meeting with the World Health Organization. And there's so many times, and we can get into it, there's so many times where Joe Biden and Adam Schiff, Democrats in the House, are saying, oh, the travel ban, it's so xenophobic, it's so crazy. And it's like, so again, from the realism perspective, we're talking about Trump is in office. Biden, what did people say? Again, Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York. New York, by the way, top 5 state in the entire country that was affected by COVID, had so many deaths. Here he is in March. Oh, you know what? I think we're doing a little bit of overreacting. So again, this isn't to try to deny that Trump didn't say stupid crap, but it's also the reality of like, okay, well, let's look at it realistically, not like ideally. If Biden's in office, maybe he talks about it better, but what does he do that's better is what, that's where I would.
Well, I think it's a bit dubious to ask what would he do. He's not president, so per definition, he can't do very much. The thing I would say is this. Even if I admit that people within the Democratic Party, and it's an admission I can readily make, were late in spotting the virus, I think what was far worse in the case of Trump is how little he's learned and how obvious it is that he's learned nothing. And I'll give you examples. As late as May, he was talking about freeing all of these states which were opening in contradiction to health guidelines that that his task force had put out. He was talking about opening schools. I live in Israel. Opening schools is considered to be one of the determining factors which led to Israel being in such a crappy state. Originally, Israel was in a great situation with COVID. We were one of the safest and most effective countries in the world. And I don't think that opening schools was independently responsible. But I think that when you take Trump's statements throughout May, throughout all the way through July, and even now he wants to open up the NCAA, the entire thing is quite absurd to me. And it shows, I think, if you want to make the argument that the Democrats weren't on top of this in the beginning, it's an acceptable argument, although they certainly didn't go as far as Trump did in denying it and calling it a hoax and other things. But the fact that he's still pushing for things to be open, the fact that he pushed for university campuses to be open, and university campuses promptly became a hotspot of the virus, proves that over half a year into this thing, he's learned nothing about the severity of the virus. He pushed all of these states to open, and we literally saw states. I have the graphs in front of me in Florida, in Texas. Let me pull up all over the country, Arkansas, all over the country, cases rising because Trump encouraged largely governors to reopen. There's a reason why Republicans right now don't believe in wearing masks, which is clearly scientifically indicated to protect the virus. Why Republicans are skeptical about it at far higher rates than Democrats are. And it's because they've been consistently fed not over weeks, but over months. They've been consistently fed mixed messages, denialism, false promises. You talked about Trump being optimistic. Trump was on the Titanic optimistic about icebergs. That's how I see his optimism. It's not optimistic to tell somebody who has a cancer patient, you don't have cancer, we don't need to do anything about it. That's not optimism. That's called being delusional. And I'm not denying the fact that Democrats could have been more on top of it. But we're in August, mate. We're not 5 months ago, and he still hasn't learned.
Yeah. Let me just give a little summation of where we're at. So there's an agreement here. There's an agreement that Trump's messaging has been completely off, has not given the American people a realistic understanding of the severity of the virus or precautions they can and should take in order to keep the death rate low. There's also an agreement that Democrats also, at least initially, were slow to act. They also tried to minimize the severity of the virus.
Well, some Democrats.
Democrats when it comes to Biden, so many times where he was against every travel ban. So if we're gonna keep talking about how, because again, we can pinpoint or we can talk about every single stupid thing Trump said. I can't sit here and just kind of defend everything he said. I'm going to talk about policy-wise, what has he done, right? Again, I know messaging is obviously it's not positive. It's like so many people say to Trump, who are supporters, just shut up, just stop, just shut up. And I'm going to challenge Avi. I don't think that you can just say, oh, well, because Trump's had this mixed messaging for months, therefore Republicans. I think we can agree. We can't really determine at what percentage, right, when he brings up about Republicans being against the mask wearing. I just think it's kind of, if you understand where the average Republican's coming from versus the average Democrat, your average Republican is going to be more in line with like a don't tread on me perspective. So I don't know to what percent you could just say like, oh, well, Republicans at this X percentage are opposed to mask wearing and therefore it's Trump. It's like, I think these people, regardless if it was Trump, an overwhelming majority.
Well, 1 minute. I want to respond to that.
Are against the state imposing on what they determine their civil liberties, which is why you just saw a federal judge just take the governor of Pennsylvania, Governor Wolf, and say that like his shutdowns were unconstitutional. It's just like a different frame of mind. How I think someone who's more conservative, someone who's more liberal, would see this whole issue itself.
First of all, I want. I'm sorry.
One at a time, guys. Garrett, finish.
I was interrupting. Please finish and let me apologize. Well, first of all, I really strongly identify with the mentality of don't tread on me. I think, by the way, the thing I really disagree with you is that Republicans are tread on me. Everybody is don't tread on me when they feel like somebody is treading on them, if you understand what I'm saying. So I know.
I just interject.
1 minute.
The government kind of like what government kind of will say intervention. We'll say that's what I meant when I said that don't tread on me. That like classical libertarian kind of mindset that I think you find more prevalent in like. I have a great respect for libertarianism in certain situations, situations of what people should teach their children, in situations of personal privacy, I do. But in situations of national emergency, I think, and I say this very bluntly but respectfully, I think we have to take libertarianism and throw it out the window. When you're dealing with, and I'll explain why, and state rights are something that I value, but I think that in a pandemic, state rights had to be superseded by national need. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, we didn't get up and say, oh, this is a state's issue. We don't want the federal government to tread on you. We started drafting people into the national military to defend their country. When Al-Qaeda flew planes into the World Trade Center, we didn't say, oh, it's a state issue. It happened in New York. Why should somebody from Vermont be affected by this? What we said was our nation is threatened by something and we need a national response. And when it was COVID, I have to be very direct here and say, COVID does not respect state boundaries. It does not respect political ideologies. We needed a national response. And yes, if there had been a Democrat in office, the response might have been slow, and that sloth might have cost lives. But when we're in July and we have a president who's calling to NCAA football, that's like what's at stake in a country where 200,000 people are dying, in a country where MLB games are being canceled because entire teams or large parts of teams are being diagnosed with COVID. How is this what you're still pushing for? How, I'm sorry to get emotional about it, but how is the message not transition to things that are more important than whether the Florida Gators are going to be able to play Alabama or I don't know what? I don't understand this at this point, and I think it's a mark of continuous incompetence. Not knowing is bad when you're a leader. Not learning is far, far worse. And what Trump has honestly showed me, maybe not you, and maybe not the millions and millions of people who I'm sure are intelligent, respectable people who are voting for him, but what he's shown me is not only did he not know, but he never learned and hasn't learned on the job.
Avi, I actually have a quick question for both of you. Just I think it'll give us more clarity. So on the issue of not wearing masks and questioning the official narrative. I want to put this out there because I actually think we need to be more understanding towards those who are questioning the official narrative, because given the circumstance, our complete lack of trust in institutions and how greatly America has failed its people when it comes to public health, I think it's actually legitimate to question the official narrative. If we look at some numbers, it's something like 60% of Americans are overweight. 60-something% take prescription medication. And a lot of this has to do because of pharmaceutical industries and just other marketers who are pushing their substances on the American people. In addition to that, governments have a very long history of seizing control and more power when they have the opportunity to. And the mainstream media fans the flames of fears every single opportunity they get. They are the epitome of the boy who cried wolf. I mean, they have a business model to get people to sit and watch TV. That's what they want. What makes people sit and watch TV? Fear. So there's literally a race to the bottom when it comes to the mainstream media. They're all trying to give the most dramatic and fearful stories in order to get people to watch. So, given all this, when you have Americans becoming more aware of the problem in these institutions, I think we should be understandable where the questioning of the official narrative comes from. Again, I'm not making a defense for Trump's reaction compared to what Biden's reaction would have been, but I do want to put this out there because I think I think it's legitimate to question the official narrative. And I think if a government tells you are not allowed to leave your home, they need to have good justification for it. It's not something that we should just accept. So I just want to put that out there. Yeah.
I've been talking a lot. Please let Garrett answer the question actually first, if you want
to.
I don't know if that was the question. I just kind of wanted to put that out there.
Listen, I get what you're saying, and that's a good thing to bring up in terms of understanding why people might feel and think the way that they do. But this is maybe where Avi and I will probably have alignment. When it comes to matters of this magnitude, though, you kind of, you have to kind of, if you want to be an independent skeptic, or you want to be a critic, well, then just do the research. And when you see the research, like, obviously this isn't just like, they have weapons of mass destruction, therefore let's go in Iraq. This is more like, this isn't just like a media kind of narrative. Now, can the media sometimes be complicit in narrative? Sure. Like Dr. Fauci admitted that they told people deliberately not to wear masks in the early onset because they were worried that they weren't going to have the supply for it as well. Same thing with the Surgeon General Jerome Adams back in early March said people stop wearing masks. So it's just, it's understandable, but this is one of those topics where you kind of just have to go with like, all right, well, what is the evidence? Show me. You can't really just be like, well, these are my personal attachment, views, and beliefs. And yeah, sure. Will the 24/7 mainstream media cycle have like a psychological effect on somebody that might cause them to be more fear and based? And could that even potentially cause psychogenic effects? Yeah, of course. I mean, there was a study that was done by I think it was the Department of Homeland Security back in 2005 that demonstrated that when people were in areas of conflict, that just the constant fear of a terrorist attack could cause psychogenic effects that they themselves would then have to internalize. So yeah, can the media either intentionally, I can't prove that, or unintentionally cause that? Sure, but I just think this is one of those topics where like you have to, even if you see that happening, you still have to be able to parcel through it and just stick to like the facts of the matter, and not like what Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity are saying.
Well, and also I see, I think about how I was thinking today in the prep for this debate about how different leaders handle moments which are terrifying, 9/11, or Winston Churchill getting up before the British people when they were attacked by the Nazis, in 1940, when Britain faced a war where its survival was threatened. I mean, the Nazis could have, had they taken the manpower that they spent attacking the Soviet Union and invested it into attacking the British Isles, they would certainly have crushed Great Britain. But regardless, I think about how leaders face moments of challenge. Abraham Lincoln facing the American people and telling him, we need to go into the fight of our lives to save our union. George W. Bush on September 11th, I thought his policies in the aftermath were a big problem. But I thought that his response to the attack, when he got up and told the American people, yes, what happened to us was objectively terrifying, but we are going to get together and get through this. That's what leadership is. Leadership isn't lying to people about the severity of what's where COVID is spreading in the eyes and telling it COVID isn't a risk. It's telling the people COVID is a risk, and we're going to get through this together. We're going to get through this, Democrats and Republicans, something that I've, again, never heard the president say, although I don't listen to every word he says. I haven't heard him say anything even in the spirit of that. When getting up and saying, these are objectively terrible times, looking somebody in the eye who has cancer and saying, you have cancer, but we're going to do everything we can to fight for your life. I want to hear something like that, not a president who gets up and says, we take no responsibility for what's going on. The difference between a good leader and a bad leader, and I'm not saying Biden is a great leader, but I am saying Trump is a terrible leader, and COVID proved that. The difference between a good leader and a bad leader is a bad leader tries to figure out how they're not responsible. A good leader tries to figure out how they can be responsible, how they can prevent things. They don't say, oh, it is what it is, direct quote, when asked why so many Americans have died. To me, that's just a failure on every level. And it's not a rhetorical failure. It's a failure that went hand in hand. One of my favorite, I'm going to say one more thing. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is a story about Abraham and Sodom, where God is getting ready to obliterate the city. And Abraham is standing in front of the city, pleading with God, who is God, who is omnipotent and omniscient, and saying, let's do everything we can to save one person, to do one thing, trying to grasp the value of human life and to preserve human life in every way that's possible, even in a situation where objectively he could do nothing. That is leadership. That is taking a stand for something. And I've not seen that from anybody in the Trump administration. You know, the thing I wanted to say, one more thing I wanted to say to you, Adar, is that you talk about power being abused. Trump could not have implemented a lockdown. He didn't have the power to do that by the Constitution. He has a lot of influence in the Democratic Party, and we've seen that. But he never, show me one time when Trump called governors on the phone and begged them to implement the lockdowns that were necessary to save American lives. Fine, Democrats were clueless. You're going to tell me they were clueless in January, February. Did he do it in March? Did he do it in April? Did he do it in May, June, July? No, he pushed the country to be reopened. And that was a failure. He did not do the very basic. He did not stand, Americans were going to die, but he didn't stand there as a leader did and say, let's do what we can. He said, it was the Chinese. I wanted to say one more thing to you, Garrett, regarding the lockdown, which I think was justified. Now, objectively, the lockdown on China was not sufficient for two reasons, and I'm just pointing this out as a matter of policy. Number one, because I believe 40,000 Chinese citizens came into the U.S. after the lockdown, oftentimes with little to no checkups. But the other reason is because a lot of the cases came from Europe, which he only closed down in mid-March. Now, maybe Democrats overreacted to the lockdown. I mean, this is a president who's, after Puerto Rico got flattened by a hurricane, the first words out of his mouth were, they owe us money. I don't know if that's racist, but that's definitely a bit odd. I don't think he would have done that had, like, this happened where, you know, like in Maryland or in Massachusetts. But regardless, there was also behind the China lockdown, which I thought was justified and I think is justified, were two failures. The first failure, as I mentioned, was that he didn't lock down Europe until it was far too late, and he didn't restrict travel from other places in the US until it was far too late. The second thing was a rhetorical way in which he tried to push blame for the virus and responsibility for the virus entirely on China. And that's just ridiculous to me. because the entire world dealt with Chinese miscommunication and with WHO, whatever it was that they did. Miscommunication, lack of sufficient communication, the entire world dealt with that. Why are we so much worse off than countries that went into lockdown before us? We had more time to think about these things, and we didn't under Trump's administration. And as I've spent already, I think 20 minutes trying to repeating like a mantra, he hasn't learned, he hasn't figured it out. And for that reason, just like any CEO on his world famous Apprentice game show, I think it's time to look him in the eyes and say, you're fired. Thank you very much. Go back to doing whatever you were doing before. We need people who, if they weren't ideal in how they handled the virus, at least learned from the mistakes. That in a comparative of who's better, late or never, I'll pick late any day.
So, Garrett, thank you, Avi. Garrett, before you go, I just want to ask some questions just to kind of clarify, where we all stand. Avi's attacking this from two angles. He's saying Trump's messaging has been all over the place, didn't give people an understanding of what they need to do. And two, his actual policy, not his language, his policy was wrong because we didn't lock down fast enough. You've acknowledged that Trump on the messaging doesn't do a good job. Do you think lockdown is the right approach to COVID-19?
Is that directed to me or?
Yeah. That's you. Because I strongly support right now.
It's with Avi though. It's like, again, I've tried to prepare for this debate and this conversation, not like what I think. It's a matter of like what can really happen, what's pragmatic, policy. Like, could we do a lockdown? Could that work? Yeah, sure. But like he said, you can't unilaterally, Trump alone can't just unilaterally impose a lockdown. Could he have maybe tried to do better messaging with talking to some of the governors about, what we should do, or some of the organizations, private? Yeah, sure. But it's not. So Garrett, do a lockdown, but I can't politically enforce a lockdown in this situation.
Avi, hold on real quick.
He froze on my end. I don't know if you.
Yeah, Avi, you're frozen. I just have another follow-up, Garrett. So
I'm frozen?
No, you're back. You're back now.
Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, you're back. You're back. Garrett, would you say it's fair to conclude that it's not that you think Trump has dealt with COVID so well, but there's no evidence that Biden would do a better job? And given there's no evidence that Biden would do a better job, and because you align with Trump more so on other issues, you're willing to give him a pass on this, it's like a wash of sorts. Would you say that's your position?
A little bit, but I would say policy, I don't agree 100% that he's done such a terrible job. People have to remember, like Avi pointed out, that, I can go through all the timeline, because the beginning, like Avi said, obviously what you do once it's here obviously matters, but like the beginning is also super important. So you have like the CDC in late January saying that it had been preparing for weeks for the potential entrance of the coronavirus in the United States, spent about $80 billion on a national biological defense. Trump, even in late January, said we are in very close communication with China concerning the virus. Very few cases reported in the U.S., but strongly on watch. He even offered China help. China refused that help. You have a quote, Senator Tom Cotton, who was actually the first person who openly called for the China travel ban. And again, this is Trump versus Biden, not like what Avi or Garrett or Adar think. Trump versus Biden. They opposed every travel ban early on. And you have multiple quotes from Dr. Fauci said that the travel ban and other experts absolutely saved lives. And so you have in late February, Senator Tom Cotton said every conversation he's had with President Trump for the last month has been involved to stop the spread of the coronavirus. I could keep going on with quotes and different policy thing. I just think it's unfair when I get the messaging part that's bad when it comes to like policy. Like remember, it was March 11th when the World Health Organization finally declared it being a global pandemic, right? 2 days later, that's when Trump decided to enact the task force. You have to also remember that it was February 26th that was the first time that the CDC had officially actually given a case for COVID. It was the next day that the task force got initiated. So, and it's like, again, when Avi was referring to earlier about, oh, Trump, he's downplaying it. Quote right here, September 9th, Dr. Fauci defends Donald Trump from claims that he lied about the coronavirus, saying, I don't recall anything that was a gross distortion of things that I spoke to him about. Before I hand it back over to Avi, because Avi's done a lot of stuff. Here's he said March. Here's in March, New York again, one of the worst states who got affected. He said, praise President Trump's, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo praised President Trump's response efforts to the coronavirus pandemic in New York, saying his team was on it and that he was doing the right thing. He also called for Americans to put politics aside. And one more good quote, again, that kind of goes to the defense here about actions over, that's where I come from. I don't listen to people's words, whether it's good or bad. Actions are always how I judge a person. He was interviewed on a Fox News channel with Mark Levin. This is Mark Levin. You've been doing this a long time. Have you ever seen this big of a coordinated response by administration to such a threat, a health threat? Dr. Anthony Fauci. We've never had a threat like this, and the coordinated response has been, there are many number of adjectives to describe it. Impressive, I think, is one of them. So, I'm not going to just totally concede to that, because Trump said bad things. It's like, yeah, but if we're just going to pretend that he has done nothing that's positive, or that he hasn't done things that are positive, and again, because of the fact that we don't have a nationalized healthcare system, that's obviously, regardless of who's president, that's going to have an effect on this. Because, as Adar pointed out, when it comes to the health, right, the 94% of those who died with COVID died with one or more comorbidities, and those two highest ones were diabetes, hypertension. Well, gee, I wonder where the United States ranks in the world. Let's see. For diabetes prevalence, the International Diabetes Foundation released that the World's Diabetes Congress in Vancouver reveals that, unsurprisingly, the United States has the highest prevalence of the population aged 20 to 79 of diabetes amongst developed nations. How about for obesity? Where's the United States rank? Number 1. How about hypertension? Where does the United States rank? Number 2. So I think that's where I'm coming from, is the realism. We can have all these, Trump said this, blah, blah, blah. I'm looking at more I think, while he said a lot of things that were incorrect, to deny that he hasn't done proper policy, I mean, I don't think that's...
Well, I'm not
and if Biden was president, tell me in actuality what would have been, he would have spoke about it better.
One minute. First of all, I
guys, listen.
In fact, I don't know what would have been better with a Biden.
Listen,
for the numbers, for the data.
Yeah, it's important to remember that this isn't like us sitting in the room, so it can only project one audio at a time. So when two people are speaking at once, the viewers can't understand anything. So please be aware of that. Just to finish up what Garrett said, he asked what you think Biden would have done better.
Well, first of all, I don't think that it's possible to prove it counterfactual. You could tell me oh, well, what if, John McCain or Barack Obama I can't reasonably tell you what people who were not in the office could have done. I think that's an unreasonable request to make of anybody in any debate, because it would be speculative, what I can do.
Yeah, guys, one at a time.
Yeah. You did say a lot, and you said a few things that I agreed with and a few things that I didn't agree with. So I want to kind of want to address what you were saying on a point-by-point basis, and tell me if I didn't, if I'm neglecting anything. So good points you made, which I can definitely say I agree with, and which I can definitely say that Trump is in no way responsible for. Obesity, diabetes, risk factors definitely affected the number of people who died in the United States. No doubt about it. I'm not looking at Trump and going, why do so many people in the United States have diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. you know, and I'm not denying that Trump did everything right. What I have said and what I've continued to say, I can't imagine any president, honestly, being obtuse enough to suggest reopening states under the conditions that Trump did. So I'm not comparing Trump to Biden because Biden's never been president. I'm comparing Trump to a competent president of reasonable intelligence with good information, which I do not think Trump is. And what I could say is that at the point at which a virus has been raging in the country, and at the point at which health experts are saying we are not ready to reopen, at the point at which states are opening in contradiction to guidelines which your task force has set out, and you're encouraging them to do it, you are incompetent. Very simple. And you know what? I'm not 100% sure that that Biden would have done a good or perfect job. I feel, based on what I've said, I hope I've made this case compellingly that he would have done better than Trump. Because as I said, late is better than never. However, what I am sure about is that we wouldn't have seen that when a president fails as profoundly as Trump has, and continues to fail, and continues to not learn, and continues to push reopening. I just want to point out that until a miracle virus, which apparently a third of Americans won't, a miracle vaccine, which apparently a third of Americans won't even take, nobody in America can even give me a plausible, or anywhere else, can even give me a plausible narrative for how America is going to get out of this until mid-2021, where cases in Germany, the UK, France, Italy have all gone down. America's still in its first wave of the virus. And I think that speaks paragraphs and pages and volumes about the incompetence here. I think that even if I can't prove to you that Biden would have done a great job or even a good job in the virus, there's a message that's sent to people, to the American people and to the world. When somebody fails and we remove them from office and replace them with somebody who, by any comparative, would do a better job. Maybe not a great job, but a better job. Biden was not my first choice or my second choice. But when it's him or Trump, and Trump has failed this nation so profoundly, and we're looking at 200,000 deaths, and we're talking about the NCAA Big Ten football, I have a problem. And I think that problem can be solved on November 3rd and by removing this person from office. I hope I made that extremely clear. Now, I want to point out one more thing, which is we've talked about communication. I think that's something that both sides of the debate, and probably Adar, agree has been insufficient. The communication was a problem. But I want to point out to you how much of COVID response is dependent on communication, because everything that we do to mitigate most of what we do to mitigate COVID is based on voluntary citizen actions. We can't watch everybody all the time. So at the point at which I think we've seen how lock-ins can vote, if you're going to get up and equivocally every day, like a normal president would, wear your damn masks. You know what? Make masks that say "Make America Great Again." If you want to. I'm sure every Republican would have done it. I'm sure if Donald Trump would have come out and at the point at which it was obviously clear that wearing masks were a good idea and had little MAGA face masks, Republicans would have started wearing them. And not only that, would have started telling people who aren't wearing them, you're unpatriotic. And I'm not saying that I'm not in favor of pointing fingers at people and calling them unpatriotic or traitors to the country, but under the circumstances, there could have been worse things. What I'm talking to you about here, and where I think Biden would be better than Trump, where I think anybody with common sense would have been better than Trump, is the ability to learn. I can't honestly tell you that under Democratic leadership, I mean, we see that, for example, Barack Obama had a whole pandemic playbook, which outlined step by step who to call in other countries, what to do, and at what stages to implement which policies. I think that we can pretty qualitatively say and put together a permanent task force, which Trump later disbanded. I think we can pretty objectively say that somebody like Barack Obama would have been better than somebody like Donald Trump. But I think between that, we can also pretty objectively say that somebody who's not a complete narcissist and a complete rejectionist of science, as Trump has repeatedly shown himself to be, would have been better than Trump. I think those are not necessarily assumptions, not necessarily prescriptive statements that I can make, but I think that those are reasonable assumptions. I think that we can reasonably say Biden would have done better. I think we can reasonably say that Biden would have made mistakes, but he would have learned from those mistakes. I think we can reasonably say that Biden represents a party that throughout the pandemic has listened more to science and less to things like, hydroxychloroquine. And I think that on the basis of all of those things, Trump simply would have been a better man for this moment than Trump. Not maybe a great president, not a good leader, but certainly by comparative standards, a better leader. That's
Avi, I'm good.
Right.
Garrett, can I respond?
I feel like
yeah. Give me real quick. It's getting a little bit choppy. I don't know if that's all of us or Avi on your end. It's a little bit choppy. Maybe you can move a little closer to the router. Garrett, I'm going to give you the final.
I'm going to move inside.
Yeah. Do that. Avi, Garrett, I'm going to give you the final word on this before we move over to the issue of climate change. I do want to share an observation. So, Avi, I agree with you that it's possible because of Trump's poor messaging that many Republicans aren't wearing masks or won't take the vaccine. But I actually think that there's a dissonance between what Trump's saying and what many Republicans believe. So I'm not sure that all responsibility can be put on him. I'm actually confident we can't put all responsibility on him because it seems like there's a growing denialism on the American right that is unrelated to Trump. And here's a great example. You said, So we agree here. I just want to put out because it's an interesting observation. So a third of Republicans, you said, won't take the vaccine. What's interesting is if Trump's solution. His solution is a massive vaccine rollout. But if you listen to people like QAnon who love Trump, they think Trump's the savior of sorts. They view COVID as a hoax and vaccines is just a ploy to put microchips in people, right? This is an actual growing narrative, or a more moderate version of that narrative is it's just a ploy by the pharmaceutical companies to force everybody to need a vaccine. Trump is saying he's rolling out a massive vaccine program, and many Republicans who support Trump are still anti-vax, and there's some dissonance there because in order for them to justify what Trump's saying, either they just ignore Trump saying he's rolling out a massive vaccine program, or they have some like mental gymnastics to say, yeah, he's just playing a 4D chess and he's not really going to roll it out, right? But it's just important to put out there that there's something brewing on the American right. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot brewing on the American left too that we can get into, but I don't know if we'll have time today. But there's something brewing on the American right that is beyond even Trump, and I think that's important to put out there.
Well, 1 minute, can I respond to that because I think it's an excellent point.
Yeah, just keep it brief, and then we're going to give Garrett the final word on this.
Okay. And 2 points about this. First of all, I want to make it unequivocally clear, unambiguously clear, that at no point in this discussion do I blame Trump for every wrong that's come about as a result of COVID. Racial divisions didn't begin with Trump. COVID didn't begin with Trump. Doubting science didn't begin with Trump. But when your response, but I think when it comes to climate change, which we'll talk about in a minute, and when it comes to COVID as well, Trump's attitude is science when it's good for me. And if you're asking me whether in the context of a pandemic, which has ravaged the American people, this has helped America or harmed America, whether this has taken the existing problem and made it better or worse, I don't think that anybody in this room can reasonably argue to me that it's done anything other than exacerbate the issue.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Garrett,
I wanted to ask Avi what matters more, because I guess this is just my personality getting into it. Like, what matters more, messaging or just facts, data, because again, how I came into this is like, yep, messaging, can't argue that. But again, since we're talking about Trump, Biden, I don't see why because maybe Biden before the public would be better at talking about it. I think what people, this is me personally, because it seems like we're going back and forth on what we care about, messaging or the numbers. For me, it's just the numbers. You could go up every day and say all the wrong things, but if our numbers weren't where they were, people, the messaging would just be like a political kind of torch to throw at them, but they wouldn't care as much of it. For me, I've just been focused on the numbers, and I just don't see where numbers-wise anything that a Biden administration would have done better. We didn't have enough time. We could have gotten to so many things that like Adar brought up. First off, Adar, I think he said 1 out of every 3 Americans are not going to take the vaccine. I don't think he said 3 Republicans. Avi, you can correct me if I misheard you.
I honestly don't know, but I think
it's an American thing. I don't think that's it's a Republican. I just think Americans are just skeptical, especially with the vaccine. I heard so many people in just private conversation oh, well, I'll wait for others to take the first trial or the first round and then see after that. Look, Adar touched on it all the way back in, what was it, June of this year. He directed the HHS to initiate Operation Warp Speed, aims to deliver 300 million doses of a safe, effective vaccine for COVID-19 by January 2021 as part of a broader strategy to accelerate the development, manufacturing, distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics.
Oh, I hope it works. I hope
not where the argument is made about, oh, well, if Biden was in office, the numbers would have been, we still wouldn't have had an absurd amount of cases. We still wouldn't have had the deaths that we had. And this is when I knew that was going to come up, so I made sure to research it. And if you need me to send you the article on it, I will. It's a whole website dedicated. There's actually studies with the hydroxychloroquine that actually prove if the FDA wasn't so adverse to it, add in early treatment, that's something that I can point to as a positive for Trump. Everybody laughed at him and all these studies come out. So here's a little article and I'll leave it at that. Many countries either adopted or declined early treatment with HCQ, which is the abbreviation for hydroxychloroquine, effectively forming a large trial with 1.8 billion people in the treatment group, meaning those who countries like India, Russia, other places around the world that allowed people to take hydroxychloroquine in the first 4 days. That's what they mean by early treatment. And then 663 million in the control group, meaning those that in countries that weren't allowed it. As of September 20th, 2020, an average of 70.1 per million people in the treatment group have died, meaning those that were allowed early treatment access to hydroxychloroquine, and 447.2 per million in the control group. Essentially, the treatment group has a 73.9% lower death rate, and confounding factors affect this estimate. And it says they examine diabetes, obesity, hypertension, life expectancy, population density, urbanization. I can link to that if you want, but that's something that everyone thought that was such Trump's an idiot, he doesn't listen to science, but right there is a classic example. Maybe if actually what Trump said was allowed to be, and there are states now quietly actually admitting that they will allow that to happen. There's been at least 7 states, which the most recent. That's where it's that's something that we can say Trump and Biden would have done differently, and had Trump actually got to and have that be infected, maybe the death rates actually would have been lower. And that's something that I know for a fact Biden would not have wanted to see.
If I could,
Avi, real quick, I do want to move to the next topic. So whatever your response is, make it brief and have it. Your position has been made very clear on this topic. So have your response be something that we haven't heard yet, and then we'll.
Well, I haven't read the study that you're reading. I would love to look at it, so I can very objectively and fairly say I'm not in a statement to debate the issues of that particular issue. I think that overall, most Americans feel, and I certainly feel, that there has been a certain randomness to Trump's statements, to his responses, a certain lack of coherence, a certain lack of clear messaging, which in the beginning of the debate I said that I felt was a very clear determinant of success or failure, when so many things that people are doing depend on individual actions. So I think that the article that you're showing me, I can't debate that, but I can say that if he did say one thing that was correct, it was rather a case of the broken clock being right twice a day than of him having a coherent, scientifically grounded policy at any point over the last since January. And I really want to talk to you about this more. I'm convinced that you're very informed, that you know a lot about things related to this that I don't know about. I hope I've made my views coherent, and I'm very happy to have heard yours as well on this issue.
Yeah, if I'm to just summarize the positions here, Avi, you made it very clear that you're not sure what Biden would have done, and you're not sure he would have the best response, but Trump's response has been so poor that you can't imagine someone dealing with it worse. And Garrett, you focus less, you also acknowledge that Trump's response hasn't been great, primarily in his messaging. When it comes to action, you think he has done a fairly good job, and you don't have much reason to believe that Biden would do a better job.
Yeah, like you said, when it comes to action, there's just so much. Like, we can go through the timeline.
Yeah.
How much of it is narrative and how much of it is what's actually
right?
Yeah.
Well, we could follow up at a later date. Not all ground can get covered. These are deeply complex issues, and often we need to sleep on it and reflect before we can change our perspective. It's very hard to change your perspective in an instant. So I hope this gave great food for thought for all the viewers as well as ourselves. Before we move on to the next topic, I just want to announce that the Great Debate opened a Discord server. If you don't know what that is, you're in the norm. Most people don't know what it is. It's a new form of messaging that's pretty cool. There's different chat rooms where we could talk about the different topics. It's open. It's available to everyone. I initially made it only for Patreon supporters. It's now available for everyone. I'm going to share a link right now in the comments. Join the Discord. After this live discussion, we are going to go into video chat in Discord. Now, this video chat is for patrons only, where we're going to have a debriefing of this session, and patron supporters are going to be able to interact with their guests directly. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking for the Patreon link, you can see that in the description of this video. Also, if you want to get in touch with Garrett and Avichai, their contact information is in the description as well. They're very happy to engage in dialogue after the fact. And if you like this content, you're new to this page, subscribe. We're doing this every week. Next week, it's not final yet, but I actually want to do a debate on Cuties, the new Netflix movie. One person making the case that it's a legitimate movie, the others making the case that it's unacceptable. If anybody watching this wants to take a stance, because I don't have debaters yet for this topic. This is my first time announcing it to the public, but if anyone's watching this and they want to make a case for or against Cuties, reach out to me and we'll see if we could get you on. Now on the topic of climate change. Garrett.
I'm gonna grab a bottle of water really quickly. Okay?
Yeah. Go ahead. I am no problem.
This isn't a sprint. This is a marathon. I have to be ready. So,
no, yeah. I just wish you did it while I was doing that little intermission, because now I need to keep chatting until you get back. But it's okay. I can find something to talk about. Anyway, so I just posted the Discord in the chat. Please join. It's free. And if you do want to join these private chats, after every live, we're going to do a private video chat with patrons. Support on Patreon. It's minimum entry is $3, and essentially what Patreon does is it allows me to focus more time on content creation. I still have a day job, which I happen to like, but my passion is content and activism, and I'd love to do this full time if I can make enough money doing so. So you'd be supporting me and my amazing team that helps me with this. So, Avi, welcome back. L'chaim.
L'chaim.
L'chaim. I'll take a sip of water before we touch on a very, very important topic. Climate change. Garrett Lomauro. Where do you stand on climate change?
It's a real thing, and there needs to be actions taken from from a private sector role and a public sector role. So that's why people might be like, oh, but Trump calls it a hoax from China, or Trump doesn't. The other day, he was just at a meeting with those, he was in California, where he basically told them, like, yep, don't worry, it's gonna start cooling. So the argument that I have isn't necessarily that Trump is like gonna randomly become this like climate change president. The argument, again, just like the last one, is, again, this is Trump versus Biden. And the concerns I have with the Biden administration is that, and some people who support a Biden administration might say, well, hey, listen, at least they're going to do something about it. But it's like, could you, just because you want to do something about it, like cause a lot of unintentional harm and even support policies that aren't even like scientifically sound anyway? So I'll just start by saying I'm fully aware that Trump is not someone in this regard that you can strongly defend. The only thing that I could find really was that he signed the S.3508, which is the Save Our Seas Act of 2018, and in his 2020 agenda, he wants to partner with other nations to clean up our planet's oceans. So outside of that, there's nothing that I can argue in the affirmative. So what I'll be basically going over is, since if Biden was at the helm, the three major points of contention, and I don't think they're minor. I think some people might just gloss over it because they're like, well, hey, he believes in science, he wants to do something about it. So at least Garrett, or at least Trump, he's willing to do something about it. But the three, and we'll unpack it, we'll go into it. The three ones that I want to talk about, Avi, I'll let Avi have the floor and filibuster on why Biden's better, etc. The three main points of contention I have is that these are based on either policies that Vice President Biden wants to initiate. One being, he wants to do, in his words, he wants to do what the Obama administration did, which would be to try to allocate federal funds to green energy companies. And if we look at the track record on that, it's not like it was really great. So again, I'm going to take you at your word. And if you want to repeat what's happened in the past, I have to go off of what actually happened, not what you said you want to do. Again, I'm a man of results, not of intention. He, off of his website, is a supporter of the Green New Deal, which is unscientific. And this is actually one of the few times where the right-wing talking point actually is true, that the Green New Deal is not really about environmentalism and it's about restructuring the economy. Those are the words from the chief of staff at the time, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in an interview that she had with the Washington Post. I can pull that up if you need me to. And then also the flaws with the Paris Climate Agreement as well. Nothing scientifically sound there, and could lead to a lot of unintentional harm in the battle against the climate. So yeah, go ahead. That's where I'll be.
Wait, Avi, real quick, Garrett, can you explain what you mean by unintentional harm that can happen?
Oh, well, if you want to talk for which when I brought up Paris.
Well, you just said that there's certain state policies that they are trying to implement that may have unintended harm. So I'm wondering what some of that.
Right, sure, I'll go with Paris. I'll go with the Paris Climate Agreement. So I'm sure Avi is aware of it. I'm sure a lot of people that are well researched. There was nothing more than a dog and pony show. There was nothing in the Paris Climate Agreement. There was no language that actually stated that any of these countries, I think 194 of them, that signed up for the agreement, nothing that said that they had to act, that enforced them to actually meet what their pledge was. There were even nations that were saying, yeah, Pakistan, for example, we're not going to be able to meet the goal of limiting our peak carbon emissions by 2030. So really, it was just a gentleman's handshake. But so what I talked about this in our chat before coming on here to Avi. What I'm worried about, this is where the libertarian in me comes out. What I'm worried about is, we're gonna, again, this is where, as I said at the beginning, I'm skeptical sometimes of like these global initiatives, of these like global government kind of policy agenda ideas. I look at, again, not just what's your intention, what's the reality, and I can only go off of what's actually happened in the past. So what I worry about, the unintentional harm it could create, that I alluded to in our conversation before getting on here, would be, okay, so let's say Joe Biden becomes president and he re-enters us into the Paris Climate Agreement, and let's say they redraft the language where you actually have to, the countries that sign on to it, you can't just like tell us you're going to do it. There's going to be language in there that enforces you have to actually meet the guidelines that are specific to each region or to each country. So then, as we know, in reality, with how a lot of nations operate, the unintentional consequences I could see coming from it would be, what if there are nations that either can't meet the quotas or just outright deliberately saying like, yeah, sure, we'll sign on because we know we have to. But then what happens if nations continuously fail to meet the goals or just deliberately not do it? Are we going to now what? Are we going to have this kind of global, almost like a NATO on steroids, where we're just going to like put economic sanctions on these countries that don't want to do it because, for the planet, or to go even down a darker path, because we've seen it throughout, at least the United States is all the way back to 40s, 50s, the coups that we're involved in, Iraq, all these different areas. Are we then just going to say, and it's not like Joe Biden, again, we're talking about Joe Biden, it's not like he's a little bit of a hawk. He might try to, and it's politically convenient, portray himself as a dove, but every time he's had this situation to vote, he has shown himself to be right in line with the military-industrial complex, as people like to say. How are we going to say that we won't then do a regime change war? Because it's like, well, you're refusing to go with the agreement, so therefore that's like an act of war, because the planet is what we're trying to save, and you're supposed to be helping us save the planet. By you not going along with the agreement, it's like you're an enemy to. You get what I'm saying? Like, I'm not even saying that.
Can I respond?
That scares me a lot, for sure.
Can I respond to a very long list of very interesting and mostly, I would say, what you said you brought up a lot of interesting points that I think really valid ones, and I want to address them one by one. But there are so many of them that I'm worried that you're going to run away from me before I can remember everything that you said. I'm going to start by talking about what I see as a huge problem on the right now, which is a denial of climate change. I see Tucker Carlson. I see Ben Shapiro as well, who I certainly respect some of what he said on certain issues. But when I hear Ben Shapiro get up and say, oh, well, people affected by climate change are just going to move. If you look at what, let's say, large parts of Florida going underwater, New York, Hong Kong going underwater in the next 30 to 40 years, you understand that this isn't just a few people getting up and moving. I hear Tucker Carlson in the midst of the wildfires, peddling climate change denialism. I hear Donald Trump peddling climate change denialism. And, I think what I'm seeing in the Republican Party now, based on data, is that younger Republicans are starting to acknowledge that climate change is a problem, whereas more establishment people, the older people, certainly the president of the United States now, are very far behind them. To be honest, that's not much different than what I see in the Democratic Party, just much, much more severe. I don't think that anybody in the Democratic Party will get up and say that climate change isn't a big deal. What I want to impress upon you here is that when you have a president who denies climate change repeatedly, as Trump has, the president has a big platform and a big audience, particularly a president as charismatic and as capable of firing up his poor voter base as Trump. And I fear that what Trump is doing, and I don't think removing him from office is going to solve this, but what I fear Trump is doing is creating a generation of Republicans who, at the time when we need to be doing the most, are going to be throwing every wrench into our efforts now. And that's why I think that having a president who occupies such a public position, the way that Trump does, the way that any president does, who says that the biggest problem that our children and grandchildren are going to face is not alive. I see a lot of parallels between the anti-scientific approach within the Republican Party on COVID and climate change, and frankly, it terrifies me. Now, regarding Biden, I'm very happy that Adar, and I'm happy that we chose climate change because it's a hard thing to defend Biden on. And it puts me in a position as somebody who's going to vote for Biden of having to really question what Biden will do, whether it will be sufficient. And finding myself doubting that, I have to be honest. Again, it's comparative. What I can say about Biden, is a few things which I think differentiate himself and make him better than Trump. By the way, before I get into what's good about him, while I was doing research for this article, I found out that there are climate change deniers in Trump's, I think, as in economic advisory roles in the potential Biden cabinet. And I found that extremely troubling. Now, what I find better is the fact that his voters, Biden's voters, some of them at least, a significant number of them, are telling him, listen, get rid of these people and make accepting climate change a precondition for being your advisor. I don't know if that'll happen. But what I do think is true is that Biden represents constituents who are far more likely to vote and support legislation which is pro-climate change. I think that at a certain point, the fact that Biden has made promises, and we can talk about the very interesting issues that you brought up with international relations in a moment. But I think that at a certain point, making promises to your constituents, at least it puts you in a better position, or a less untrustworthy position, if you will, than somebody who openly says climate change is not a big deal and I'm going to do nothing about it. Not only do nothing about it. I mean, Trump has gotten up and said, "I support coal." Coal isn't even economically efficient. Forget about the environmental issues surrounding it. We need, at a time when the UK, which has built the biggest offshore windmill system in the world, and the EU are moving dramatically to reduce carbon emissions, America is not taking a leading position in this at all. And you can argue with me that Biden wouldn't do a good job. I'm just saying, give him a chance, because he's better on this issue than somebody who openly denies it. And the day that, and I want to add something else to this and say, and I agree with your skepticism about Biden 100%, the day that Biden becomes president, my social media is going to be lit up with, Biden, what are you doing to save our grandchildren and us from climate change? Because I think you're right. There does need to be accountability on that issue. So in sum, with regard to the Trump-Biden comparison, this is not something that I'm enthusiastically voting for Biden on that basis. I agree with you that there are severe reasons to be skeptical, but I think it's much worse than having a much better, or at least not as bad as having a president who time and time again communicates the issue, the message to the American people that we can use this planet and the environment as like toilet paper, that we can withdraw from every commitment we've made, from every regulation we've committed ourselves to protecting national lands, and also to reducing carbon emissions, which I see at this point is crucial. Now, I want to jump forward to an interesting point that you made about the politics and geopolitics of climate change, which is that within the world of carbon emitters, there are a few big ones, two very worrying ones, okay? The first, actually, I would say this. There are three categories of countries which worry me to various degrees. There are the mega emitters, which is China now at the first place and the US at the second place. Secondly, there are countries which are using too much carbon. These are developed countries, mainly in Europe, which are working very rapidly to curb their carbon emissions. And the third, and I think this is the most concerning, are emerging economies like India and Southeast Asia, which are shooting up economically and as they are consuming more and more fossil fuels. So I think that that's my general analysis of what's happening. I think that the two major challenges facing the world are, number one, reducing carbon emissions in China and in the United States, which are using far, far, far too much. And number two, as countries like India and countries in Southeast Asia and South America are emerging as economies, how to get these countries to become economically successful without emitting more and more fossil fuels. And I think those are the challenges we're facing. And I think the question of how to do that is extremely important. The last point I wanted to make before I give the floor back to Adar or to Garrett is that I don't see the US going to war and instilling regime change over climate change. In fact, I don't see the US going into a regime change war for a very long time. You know, Trump is a hawk, at least in his rhetoric, but not even the Republican Party or the Democratic Party will get behind a war with Iran or with anywhere else in the Middle East. Americans simply have learned the lesson, in my opinion, of the lessons of Iraq. So I agree with you that we have to think about enforceability without human rights abuses, enforceability without colonialism and imperialism. I agree with you very strongly on that. What I'm not sure I agree with you as strongly about is whether America is going to go to war with, I don't know, Brazil over its climate emissions. Or even enter a trade. I'm not sure about trade wars. That's more discussable, but certainly not on the I don't think that the problem is necessarily on the magnitude that you suggested that it might be. Although I think in principle, the question of enforceability and justice are very, very relevant.
Thank you, Avi. Garrett, all you.
So then the questions that I would have, if you're not even, or if you're not in alignment with me, if we're going to listen to the science, right, we have 12 years to act. We need 12 years to act in order for us to still be able to, you know, have the planet as it stands. We need to be able to reduce what was the goal of it? What was it? 1.2 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius by 2050? So, like I said, if you enter an international agreement with all these nations, and as you pointed out, rightfully so, I kind of laugh that like we're going to tell all these developing nations like, hey, the reason that we were able to get to where we were and to the level that we're at economically, we didn't care about carbon emissions and we just industrialized like crazy. But now all these developing nations, and another factor too is how are we going to, I guess we're just getting more into the topic itself, which I have no problem.
No. I think, can I respond to that?
Yeah, can I respond?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the problem would be if you look at like what the pragmatism of it is, if the global population is soon to get to 9 billion, but we're trying to just say, and again, this comes up, this is why I think Joe Biden's support in the Green New Deal to me scares me. I know it sounds maybe ridiculous, but partially scares me more than just kind of the Trump approach, because the Green New Deal is trying to do stuff that you can't even do. Like by 2030, like there's no mention of nuclear power or other forms of it. It's like, we're just going to go totally, you know, wind power. It's like, it's not even pragmatic to do. And it just seems like there's just, again, how do you scientifically, how do you have with the global population increasing at the rate that it is, how do you then sell poor developing countries like, hey, go ahead and do this, like, and for them to match the energy and joules that they're going to need electrically to even like take on that kind of load demand.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, sure.
And I'm going to try to speak more, I'm going to try to make my responses shortly, because I feel like at a certain level, there's like a lot of ideas flying across. And so I want us both to have a chance to address point by point what each other are saying. So I think that there is a way that you can reach developing countries and reasonably get them to reduce power without being imperialist. I'm very happy, and I think we're in complete agreement that needs to be what we do. I think a good place to start is going to these governments and saying, listen, you're going to be the most affected by COVID. The global south, which is warmer and poorer and drier generally than let's say Europe or North America, is going to be hugely affected by climate change. Israel is going to be hugely affected by climate change. This entire country could become a desert. I'm in Eilat. You know what would happen to Eilat if it was 3 degrees warmer every day? I'm about to drop dead as it is. I can't even go to the grocery store without drinking 2 liters of water. But Israel isn't a developed country. My point is that countries like Thailand, India is going to get absolutely ravaged by climate change. It's just a question of how much. Countries in South America, are all going to be really affected. That's the first thing. The second thing is that assuming that you advance technology, and technology in energy is advancing pretty fast, there's no zero-sum game between economic development and sustainable energy. And I do think that what European countries can do and what American countries can do, instead of playing a blame game where it's like, oh, you can't do what we did, is go to these countries, frankly, and say, listen, let's talk about how we can invest in sustainable power. Because I'll tell you something else. I've been to Bangkok, I've been to Thailand, I've been to China, to all of these countries which are heavily reliant, have large amounts of a large urban industrial complex, and the air there is filthy, and the air there is killing people. Nobody wants to live in this world. The hygienic standards are awful. Gasoline is expensive compared to the sun. The sun is shining. You put the infrastructure in place and you maintain it. Wave energy, things like that. It's not a negative sum game. If you could give the average person in a country a car that's powered by the sun, of course they're going to take it. Or that's powered by that's powered by sustainable energy. It's just much cheaper, as a general rule. Because so what. I agree with you that it would be extremely cruel to go to countries which are already going to suffer hugely from industrialization-related global warming, and tell them, hey, stop your efforts to become rich. Where we did it, you can't. I agree with you, and what I'm telling you is that we don't have to play that blame game. We don't have to go down that road with them. We can help them create a future that's more carbon efficient if we have the political will. The other thing I wanted to say, and I'm sorry to bring Trump back into this, is that in a world where America has no commitments to anybody else, and where it denies climate change, and where the prevailing logic is America first, F the rest of you, I don't see any of this happening. I'm not sure I see it happening with Biden either, but I definitely see it happening more. I definitely see more of a possibility to reach this endpoint with a Democrat in the White House than with somebody whose attitude towards the world has generally been to treat it like toilet paper. That's all I want to say. I'm sorry to bring back really short.
I want to just bring up, strengthen a point you made, Avi, because, America has the biggest private sector in the entire world. And it seems like a good approach would be for the American government to subsidize clean energy and incentivize the private sector to mass produce clean energy solutions and become the global exporter and provider of clean energy solutions. I think America should step into that role and do that. Now, again, if we're talking about Trump or Biden, I don't think either will get us there. I don't think either have what it takes or even the good faith to get us there. But Avi, as you said, you agree with that. You just think Biden's a little bit better than Trump in that regard. And Garrett, I guess it almost seems like on this topic we've come to agree that it's the lesser of two evils. It's just you guys don't agree on who the lesser evil is here, right?
I guess it's like I'm looking at it like everything we're saying sounds good, but what's like really going to happen? Like you just brought up the point, maybe we should look to subsidize the private sector. Again, Obama administration did that with Biden. They did that 10 years ago. Some of it worked, but some of it didn't. So it's like, do you just say, well, hey, we tried, some of it worked, but I mean, money does play a factor. Like I get it. We're trying to protect the planet and we want to do what we can to keep a sustainable climate. But to just act like money doesn't matter at all, whether it's from a federal level or from a private individual and family level, that's where some of it, like, it's more like I'm trying to say that while I can't like argue in the affirmative for Trump, I can point out a lot of flaws with, like, let's say the Biden's take on this, where I haven't really heard. Like they sound good in theory, but in reality, I'm like, I don't know. It sounds like it's more like we're inserting our optimism or hopefulness that, oh, it's going to work out as they said it's going to work out.
Right. Well, I agree with both of you, and I don't. Unfortunately, at this critical time, I can't say that I've been persuaded that Biden would be great or even adequate in this regard. What I'm looking at as a voter on a comparative level is who has a better chance to surprise me for the better. And in that case, I think it's Trump. Now, I think I wanted to address 2 points, 2 interesting points that Garrett just made. The first point was about industry, and the second was about people and individuals. I think we've seen in the last year, I've seen a change in the dialogue where businesses and even huge businesses are starting to realize that, listen, even from the point of view of business, we need to do something about climate change. Now, that's ugly and cynical that it takes thinking about your own bottom line to get you on board with things that are going to help the planet and save, in my opinion, in my view, millions of lives. But at the same time, the fact that it's happening is objectively good. The second thing that's happening in America and around the world is that people in developed countries are starting to live more and more with the consequences of climate change in the form of more severe hurricanes and the wildfires in California, which have been a particularly dramatic and hellish image of what the future can be. And I think people are waking up. And I think, so I have to look at this situation and say, okay, well, which party in the American system? I'm a Democrat. I'm not an objective person. I'm a liberal Democrat who tries to make good arguments for what I believe. But I also have to look at the situation and say, when increasing numbers of voters start looking at the government and saying, listen, you need to get us out of this mess before it swallows us alive, which is a party that's going to be the more accountable or less accountable? And I have to say, no. The Democratic Party will not be perfect, but I do feel it would be better. I feel that the number of legislators and number of leaders within the Democratic Party who believe in climate change and its severity are far higher than in the Republican Party. And what we need is a consistent voice of voters getting up and putting pressure on these people to keep their promises and to make those promises a priority. And I think that's markedly different than the Democratic Party, than the Republican Party, where leading public intellectuals and the President of the United States repeatedly stand on a podium and say, we don't care. You can't reason with these people, even if you want to. I think that's a clear difference. Politics is about making hard choices, but in this case, to me, the choice is extremely clear. Deal with people who have at least in principle agreed that the biggest threat to our planet is a problem, and those who won't even listen to reason or science. Just as in COVID, I don't think that Democrats would have provided a perfect or ideal solution. I don't think they would have played a perfect game, maybe not even a good one, but they would have played a better one. And because they rhetorically take responsibility, if we put pressure on them, there's more of a chance in the comparative that they will do something about it. And for that reason, I have to try to put a party into power where more legislators believe that climate change is an issue and are willing to discuss solutions, rather than one where the head of the party and the head of the country, in fact, under that party's leadership, is in denial. When I turn on my TV and see Tucker Carlson or Ben Shapiro underplaying or flat out denying climate change or claiming it's a hoax, I'm terrified. We needed to be past this 15 years ago. The fact that there is a major Republican political party in the United States that isn't where the rest of the world is, because let's face it, climate isn't a debate in the UK or in Germany. Everybody knows it's happening there. Everybody listens to the scientists there. The fact that we have a party which seems to run the country about half the time that doesn't believe that this is a problem and won't even engage with people in how to solve it is the biggest problem facing the world's #2 carbon emitter right now. And for that reason, because I think that climate change is the biggest long-term threat to our sustainable existence as a species, I'm going to continue voting a Democrat by default until I see evidence that any Republican president takes it, even acknowledges the problem, even calls this cancer, which is going to eat our planet alive, what it is.
Yeah, like I said, everything you said sounds great, but what I worry, again, and you haven't addressed it, would be something like the Green New Deal being so strongly supported. If you were to take a policy like that and actually implement it, not only does it not, you're not able to even achieve what you're aiming to achieve for. It just seems like there's going to create a whole litany of problems that I think get underplayed in this. Like, I get it.
Like, can you give me specifics? Do you mind?
Sure. So, from like the research I did, so the language pretty much says that they want 100% of the national power.
Oh, you're lagging. I can't hear.
Can you guys hear me now? Can you guys hear me now?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. The last thing I heard was that you said that 100.
Wait. Hold up. Avi, hold up. Sorry, I muted you both just because was my mic off? Were you guys able to hear me?
It said your host mic was muted. It said that.
Okay. Sorry, Garrett. I was trying to intervene real quick. I feel like I don't want us to get repetitive. So, Garrett, you've made it very clear that you just don't think the rhetoric of the Democratic Party will match the results that they're aiming to achieve.
I just want
to know what you think a president should do to address climate change.
I guess the more, let me think about that really quick before I just give a potshot answer. I guess you can do regulations, but they can be sensible and bound in science, and that's, I guess, what I worry about. You're starting to see, it's funny how, like, a lot of times in these political debates, all the bad things attributed to the what are growing in this country are always on the right. Oh, the right's, denial of science and this and that, and it's like, okay, but who do you think is more likely to be in favor of like labeling of food with genetically modified products or like banning it from even being a thing? That's unscientific. There's no science that documents genetically modified foods are as harmful for you as organic or more harmful than would be organic. So what I'm getting at is that on the left or the Democratic side, what I see is they're allowing, it's like everybody knows it. It's not that like every Democrat is in alignment with, let's say, like an Ocasio-Cortez like personality, but they're seeming recently to have the loudest microphone and they're seeming to have the most kind of influence. I mean, let's be honest, if it wasn't for her, do you think Joe Biden really says he wants to do a Green New Deal? Like, I don't think any of us here think Biden's going to be like, yeah, we're going to do a Green New Deal. But because they know there is a large support for it amongst, as we're talking about, the voter base, something like that kind of scares me because, like I said, you're not even going to be able to achieve what you want to achieve. You're setting these ridiculous expectations in a really short timeline. And now you're trying to also again, really, I just want to point this out because I alluded to it before, and then I'll let Avi have the floor. Let me just pull it up. Sorry if this takes me a little while.
Just making sure my mic is working.
Yeah, I can hear everybody. Did anybody here watch Around the Horn on ESPN? Where they can just the host would just mute people. It would just
yeah.
Well, this was my first time muting people because I had to get to the bottom of it to to understand what was happening with my mic.
Right.
But,
So the one thing I heard Garrett say, if I'm not wrong,
I found the thing I wanted to bring up.
go for it.
So here again, this is back in July of 2019, and this is again where my fear comes from. This isn't me being a climate change denier. This is me being fearful of pragmatism, realism. Saikat Chakrabarty, who was a lead role in helping this get the Green New Deal legislation, chief of staff to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He was there to meet Sam Ricketts, the climate director for Washington Governor Jay Inslee. Mm-hmm. He says, quote, the interesting thing about the New Deal is it wasn't originally a climate thing at all. Ricketts greeted this startling notion with an attentive poker face. Chakrabarty then keeps going, says, quote, do you guys think of it as a climate thing? He continues, because we really think of it about how do you change the entire economy thing. So that's what I worry about. Scientifically, that piece of legislation, you can't even do what it's aiming for. Like you're not going to be able. So much of the science says, dude, we can't limit what we want to do. Like you can't just say no to nuclear and other forms of energy. Like even if there are, like, we have to do it in an unlimited way if we're really going to treat this seriously. And again, this is going to sound like a right-wing talking point, but I look at that piece of legislation as a Trojan horse. I really do, because when you see that really quickly, and then sorry, Avi, I really will let you have the floor after this. When you see that, where is it? That some of the largest environmental groups don't sign on to that piece of legislation, like the Environmental Defense Fund, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and the Sierra Club. Like the New Republic reported that there were others that were specifically concerned about the restrictive language. That's what I think voters should focus on more, is not like, how does a candidate sound on, like, you know, or even in this, like, what's actually going to be the effect and the results of a policy that is being pushed or promoted.
Okay, I have a question for you. First of all, before I ask my question, I want to say nothing that you sound like sounds like a Republican talking point. I think that most of what you've put forward has been sensible and has been well developed as ideas. So I'm not, you know, so I don't interpret it that way at all. The second thing the thing I wanted to ask you, you see this as a Trojan horse to what? I'm not exactly clear on this. I just want to get an idea of what.
For people that want to have more, we'll say, of like a government involvement with all levels when it comes to redistributing, or kind of like, you know, again, that's why I said to sound like a right, to kind of, instead of us being like a mixed economy, to becoming more of like a public, you know, like a very government hands-on, like, you know, we're going to do a federal jobs guarantee. We're going to do Medicare for all. We're going to do, you know, erasing college. And that all is getting like packaged in. And it's like, wait, I thought this was about the environment.
Oh, we're so on. Okay, so now I see what you're saying, and I actually agree with you 100%. I read this article last year, written by a Danish MP. So she was in Danish parliament, and she was talking about the world if we beat climate change. And she described a world which had, where everything was socialist, where nobody ate meat. I mean, I personally don't eat meat myself, but she was describing a world where all sorts of values were promoted that were not specifically related to, saving the climate. But like, you got a feeling reading what she was saying that it was about more than the climate for her. And I have a problem with that. I do. I'm somebody, by the way, who, unlike you, believes that the government should intervene more in the economy. You know, I like Sweden in terms of economically, or even the UK where there's universal health care a lot more than I like the way that the US does things. But that does not mean that I think that we should use climate change to smuggle in all sorts of ideas about social justice. I think that in a perfect world, these ideas would be looked at independently. You understand what I'm saying? And I understand the fear. I understand the fear behind that. My response to that is, and it's ugly. Like that's my real problem with it. Is I don't like the triumphalism where we go up to people and tell them that they can't eat hamburgers anymore. Like, to me, if it has to come to that, it's going to be a tragedy, because I believe in personal autonomy and I believe in free markets. Even when it comes to things, I don't think people in the world should be eating meat. I say that I don't eat meat, and I barely eat cheese and eggs. And when I do, I feel like a hypocrite. But I don't think that the way to stop people from doing things which I think are not ideal or are wrong is to go up to individuals and take it away from them. We have to have discussions with people and convince them that our values are right. That being said, having given that long introductory caveat, I have a tendency to feel that we're going to have to make sacrifices. I'm sorry to tell you, but the world is in jeopardy. I don't think it's an alarmist statement. I think that saying that the world is in jeopardy of climate change is rather like saying that the Titanic was in jeopardy of icebergs when it was sailing through the North Atlantic. It's simply objective. Sacrifices on the personal level will have to be made. It's an ugly thing to say, but people, you're not going to, I'm sorry, but your 2001 Hummer H1 is going to have to go for this to happen. It's an ugly thing to say, but there's going to be a point at which the cost of climate change, when cities start slipping underwater, when wildfires get worse and worse, as they are and as they have been, and as science tells us that they will be, there will be a point at which we have to tell people, listen, your right to a Hummer H1 is not more important than the future of the planet. And it's an ugly thing for libertarians to hear, but it's perhaps a necessary thing to say. That's the way I look at things when it comes to the climate. With regard to what you said about the Green New Deal and implementation, and I say everything I just said as somebody who doesn't believe in hiding ugly truth from people. Climate change is an issue which, in my opinion, promises, and it's not COVID where there's going to be a vaccine. You don't remelt the ice. It takes thousands of years for temperatures to return to where they were, unless we figure out some form of geoengineering which allows us to decide when it rains and snows and block out part of the sun, or I don't know what. It's a scary time. It's a time which scares me, not because I enjoy being scared, but because what I'm seeing around me is frightening. And when I look at climate change and I look at COVID, I think to myself, COVID is the appetizer. The climate crisis is a main course. And we're not going to like the way it tastes. That was pretty bad. Okay. Second of all, that was actually.
I liked it. There you go. That's the clip from today's conversation.
Now, with regard to the Green New Deal, which I am by no means an expert on, and you sound like you know loads more about it than me. I want what I really want to. There's always a gap between rhetoric and implementation. When politicians get up and say, oh, zero emissions by 2035, what they really mean is like 30% emissions by 2040. What I want to see happen is not the New Deal or the Green New Deal per se. What I want to see happen is young Republicans, young people on the right getting up and being part of a debate which says climate change is real. Let's talk about how to deal with it and preserve the things that we care about. I think this gets very much into what Adar is saying. Adar is constantly saying about how we need to talk about things. The majority, a growing number of young Republicans are starting to see that climate change is an issue. And these are people who care about free markets and have the don't tread on me mentality that you have. Let them join the conversation. Nothing would make me happier than to see 1 million young Republicans saying, let's stop climate change in a way that preserves free markets. Let's have that conversation. I want to see that happening. I'm not here to argue the Green New Deal is a great idea or that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez should be the deciding voice of American democracy. What I do want to say is, and I think this ties into what all three of us believe, is let's have honest conversations which take into account what science tells us time and time again, and what our eyes and ears tell us time and time again, is the obvious reality of a planet which is threatening to become uninhabitable. Let's try to balance that with our political values, with our social values, with our economic values. It won't be perfect, but let's meet in the middle instead of having one party which tells me that the ice is melting when everybody sees that it is.
Great. Thank you, Avi. Look, we're getting on 2 hours, so we're going to go final statements, and then we're going to head to the after party in Discord. So Garrett, in your final statement, you could include some kind of a response if you feel you want to, or you could just move to whatever final words you want to give, and then Avi will wrap it up.
Yeah, I'll just go to closing remarks. I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to do this. I think it's super important. I wish, I mean, what we just did right there, like, I'm not going to try to toot our own horns. Don't you wish this is how it went in reality, like when it comes to the average voter, or like to like the political candidates? Like, I wish this is how things went. I'm really glad that we could come on and discuss this. And I have to admit, I knew that these topics, as someone who is a Trump supporter, these are the hardest ones. I wish we could have got more into like the policy, with when it comes to COVID response. But that's okay. I can still finish saying I think the Trump administration's done more than a lot of people think. We didn't even touch on all the economic responses that he did that were very positive. But again, that's something that I think we'll just disagree on. And I knew with climate change, that's not. It's more like I have to try to poke holes at what a Biden administration would do. I can't sit here and act like, oh yeah, no, Trump's like totally right on what he says, or like, oh, the Trump administration is going to like overnight just start doing like carbon pricing or like capturing. It's just I'm aware of that, but yeah, I really enjoyed this debate, and I'm glad that we could, even with topics that I knew that were difficult, still be able to just have like a really good conversation about. So thanks, Avi.
Thank you so much.
Amen, brother.
In closing, I think I've said more than enough over the past 2 hours about my policy positions and my beliefs. I just wanted to tell you guys how humbled I was to have such a great conversation with you. Garrett, you're a great dude. Anytime, a lot of the times with my friends, when we say, oh, we're going to have a civilized conversation about politics, like 2 minutes later, somebody's throwing like a frying pan at somebody's head. Not literally, but you know what I mean. So it's been a great conversation. You're a great guy. Adar, I've seen your this podcast around a lot. I'm really honored to have been given a chance to participate in it. It was just a really humbling experience to talk to you guys, to hear more about what you think, and incredibly encouraging for me, Garrett, to see that on the issues of climate change, I don't think that we're really that far apart. And I would really love to just talk more to either of you, to both of you, about what we agree or disagree on, and important issues and the real questions that are facing the world right now.
Thank you, brother.
All right.
So look, I do want to say, Garrett, you mentioned that you have some other points you wanted to make. So in our Discord server, there's a channel just for Trump Biden. So you could leave any remarks there just to follow up. And, I want to thank you both for doing an excellent job. I mean, both of you were able to acknowledge your areas of agreement constantly. You're able to acknowledge where you thought your side wasn't doing a good job. And I think that is more intellectual honesty and understanding than what we're used to seeing. And I think the viewers agree, because this video at this point does not have a single down vote, which is pretty amazing for such a controversial topic. So tremendous respect to both of you. It's been a great honor.
I think Albus Dumbledore said it best when he said it's easier to stand up to your friends than to your enemies. And a lot of the time in politics, I find that when people are looking at others through telescopes, what they really need is mirrors to look at themselves. And so I'm trying to be introspective and humble, while also having very vocal and strong opinions. And and in talking to Garrett and to you, Adar, I found a lot to emulate. So thank you guys once again.
Thank you guys. It's been great. See you in the Discord.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
All right.